meetings. Got it. She's given testimony. She's just recently created this big document called Fighting Ohio and Big Ag to Save Lake Erie. And she says it's a document including 100 pages of fact sheets and reports she's drafted over the years that expose Ohio's split CAFO permitting scheme, which I don't know what it is. She's going to introduce Mike, and so I'll let Vickie start talking. Hi, Vickie.
Thank you. Mike is our fearless leader of the Lake Erie Advocates, and I've asked him to give me some highlights from his activism career. It began in Toledo in the mid-70s after reading articles by scientists critical of nuclear power. The Toledo Coalition for Safe Energy organized opposition to a second plant at Davis-Besse, 2 others in Erie County and elsewhere along Lake Erie. After years of protests and hearings, none of these plants were built, as the industry's economic and safety problems became widely known to investors and the public. As an independent member of the Toledo City Council, he sponsored $1 million investment in energy efficiency upgrades for city buildings, the largest such program undertaken in Ohio at that time. He's maintained an active interest in environmental protection, ranging from turning his yard into a native plant habitat, an ongoing project with his wife, Sue Carter, which he has generously shared with his friends down here in Wood County, because if you ever go past our house, I have red flags all over our property where we planted some of Mike's plants, to organizing Lake Erie Advocates, a grassroots citizen group that has succeeded in putting the environmental and animal welfare concerns of factory farms squarely on the public agenda. He and other Toledo members of Move to Amend collected 10,000 signatures to put an initiative on Toledo's ballot, which voters passed, putting the city on record supporting a constitutional amendment to remove constitutional protections from corporations and end the legal theory that money equals speech. A similar initiative to enact the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, or LEBOR, if you read about it in the paper, succeeded at the polls, but was invalidated by the federal court. Nonetheless, he remains encouraged that growing numbers of people are recognizing that corporate rule and the lack of democratic control are at the heart of environmental problems. And I totally agree. And as far as Larry and I, we've been at this for 18 years. So I always say we haven't shut them down yet, but we have slowed them down. So that's what we've been doing. Oh, and I have to show you one other thing. I found this. Larry and I were cleaning out some files, and some of the members that have been around for a while, Kristen Vesey was my mentor, and we got the Wood County Citizens Opposed to Factory Farms got an award, the Impact Award for Political Accountability for Citizens Today for making a difference in our community. And that was back in 2007, so I still got it. So thank you, and on to Mike.
Thank you very much, Vickie. And your check for that introduction will be in the mail.
Thank you. What a deal. I'm going on mute now.
Well, as you can see, we call our presentation the third battle for Lake Erie. And the first battle, you may recall from your Ohio history, was in 1813, which if Oliver Hazard Perry had lost that, we'd probably be part of Canada and have health insurance now, but that's a whole other story. The second battle for Lake Erie, we call the period in the 50s and 60s, early 70s, when Lake Erie was just about written off as a dead lake by a lot of people. And that's, you know, the picture down there, the Cuyahoga River catching on fire and so forth. I don't need to recount that sad history, but citizen activity and anger drove political action, and we got some landmark legislation in 70 and 72, including the Environmental Protection Agency and the Clean Water Act, which unfortunately have been seriously weakened since then. But that's a couple of things that came out of that effort. The third battle is what we're talking about, the current situation, where instead of phosphorus in the detergent and industrial pollution and sewage treatment plants killing the lake, we've got 25 million confined animals in these factory farms doing the same thing. And you can see a picture of an outfall from subsurface drainage. We used to call it field tile, which is not tile anymore, but that's what's going on there. And that poor catfish is washed up on my practically on my front yard a couple of years ago when we had a bad outbreak of the toxic algae. We always make sure to say that clean water is a right for everyone, and put our friend the seagull there in the middle. So we emphasize the point that we're not just talking about human beings, that there are millions of plants and animals that depend on water that is not poisonous. Just to briefly take a look at the where all the water is on Earth, if all of it was in 100 glasses, just metaphorically, 97 of those 100 glasses would be salt water. And we would have 3 glasses of fresh water in the bottom right-hand corner. But 2 of those are caught up in the ice caps and tundra. And only 1 glass out of 100 is a usable glass of fresh water. And that's divided into half, surface water and fresh water. So that 1 glass out of 100 that's fresh water, and it's divided that way between surface and groundwater. So if we look at the surface water, we can see where that is: Lake Baikal, the 5 Great Lakes, and all the other lakes and streams. So out of that 100 glasses, Lake Erie's share, just Lake Erie's share of the Earth's usable fresh surface water is 19 drops. And here's what we're doing with it. So that iconic picture taken back in 2014 when Toledo's water was basically shut off for almost 500,000 people. But that relatively small amount of water is incredibly important, as you all know. So it's important for us to be good stewards of it. 7 years after Toledo's water crisis, some people are still talking about how they're trying to locate what the problem is, and one person there probably isn't going to find anything where he or she's looking. But if they took a look at the 800 plus factory farms, in quote, in our watershed, they would pretty easily find the source of the problem. These facilities, as I mentioned, got 25 million animals in them total, and those animals excrete an amount of phosphorus equal to the sewage from all the people in Ohio, Indiana, Chicago, and Atlanta. And that's just phosphorus. We're not talking about E. coli and antibiotic-resistant bacteria and a host of other things. The number of those facilities is exploding. And you can see on the left there, there's a map from 2005. And then on the right is a map of the watershed from 2005 to 18, where the red or orange dots are added. This was done by the Environmental Working Group and shows the increase in these facilities. And responsible for an estimated 69% of the phosphorus going into Lake Erie from the Western Basin. And that's as commercial fertilizer use went down. So it should be pretty clear what the main source of the problem is. And here's a big part of why these facilities are such a problem. This map shows the concentration of subsurface drainage throughout the whole country. Our part of the country, the Great Lakes region, has got the most because it's agricultural land for the most part, and to get the crops planted and harvested, you've got to keep the water from standing in it. So as we all know in the Great Black Swamp, how important that is. But basically the reason this is up here is to show that there's nowhere in the country that has got a higher concentration than we've got here. There's other parts that have almost as high, but we've got, we're in the top or tied for first place for the concentration of subsurface drainage, and there's more being added all the time. Nobody or no corporation has got the right to impair the water, but these factory farm corporations do it and shift the costs onto the public. And this is an old story that goes along with virtually every industry: steel industry, chemical industry, oil industry. They try to externalize as best they can the costs of doing business, and in large sense that means externalize the cost of their pollution so they can maximize profits. And that's what this industry is doing at this point better than just about any other. Toledo water customers are paying at least, and I've got to get the current figure on this, but at least $6 million a year more just to treat water, plus a $500 million water treatment plant upgrade, 50 million of which was included just to put ozone into the water. And I'll get into that in a minute. Plus what's planned, believe it or not, along the shore of the 11th largest lake in the world, a $100 million billion-gallon reservoir to hold a mere 20 days water supply in case we have another incident like we had in 2014. Now, I can't think of anything crazier than building a reservoir like that next to a Great Lake, but that's in the plans. So we all know about what happened in 2014 and the harmful algal blooms, which actually isn't algae, it's cyanobacteria. That's what's going on, but everybody calls it harmful algae. Elevates the toxins in the drinking water. So we've got an overabundance of nutrients that feeds the microcystis bacteria, creating the toxin microcystin. Almost 90% of those excess nutrients are coming in from agriculture, about 50% of that via the subsurface drainage. And that's an important point to keep in mind, because the major players in state government are always talking about runoff. Well, half of what's getting into the lake isn't even runoff. It's getting into their waterways through the subsurface drainage. So these operations put our health at risk, air and water contaminants. More manure equals more phosphorus, equals more microcystis, equals more microcystin, and a compound called BMAA that has been linked to ALS, Parkinson's, and neurodegenerative diseases. Microcystin is a liver toxin, causes nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, fever, and in high enough doses, it'll kill you. And here's why. As you can see on this table that compares some pretty well-known toxins, microcystin is right up there. Treating the water makes it drinkable if you pay enough money to treat it enough. But one of the things that happen is when you treat organic pollutants with chlorine, you get trihalomethanes. And those are known carcinogens. They're not just suspected carcinogens, they're known carcinogens. And reducing trihalomethane adds to the water treatment costs. I mentioned $50 million for putting ozone into the water at the Toledo water treatment plant. And a big part of the reason, not completely, but a big part of the reason that that is necessary is to reduce the trihalomethanes. So let's follow the manure. We're getting into Vickie's favorite topic here. Here's one example, and this is not the biggest factory farm in the watershed. It's one of the bigger ones. But this is the Bridgewater Dairy in Williams County, 3,900 cows, and it generates more waste than Perrysburg, Sylvania, Maumee, Defiance, and Fremont combined. You can see where the manure lagoons are located, and over on the right, a little bit below halfway down on the right side, you can see a white oval and a lot of little dots in there. That is a veal operation, and show you up close what that looks like later, but that's where the male heifers, calves, that's where the male calves go. There is no such thing as a male cow, I have to keep telling myself. The male calves, if they don't get a bullet in the back of the head or shipped off to the belt and shoe factory, that's where they go. So it goes from these lagoons that hold 1 million or more gallons each to out in the field where it's spread and spread over and over again with these tankers, various methods. This is a picture of a tanker out there. And it gets applied and over applied. And because it's expensive to haul, and the further you have to haul it, the more it costs. So these places want to spread it as close to the facility as possible. And that means that some places it gets over applied. And Vickie knows the numbers on that better than anybody. So it goes, it's applied as a liquid on the ground through the soil to the underground drainage, in this case, in this picture, or surface runoff, and into streams that feed Lake Erie. And this is a creek near Adrian, Michigan, and that's not a root beer spill, and that's turning it brown. And eventually poisoning a Great Lake. You can see Lake Erie from outer space. And we used to have to remind public officials right in the early days of our work because they would say, well, you're just giving Toledo and Lake Erie a bad name. And we had to remind them that you can see it from outer space, so it's not really much of a secret. What we're doing currently doesn't work. This is very important to keep in mind because we hear over and over about the H2 Ohio methods, hundreds of millions of dollars being spent basically for the practices that you see here. And we've got documentation for this. If you go on our website, you can find pretty easily the documentation of why we say this. We're not making this up. We did a lot of research, studies that were done by universities and private outfits to see whether cover crops and grassed waterways, all these things, what happens after you start using them. And you find out that not only do they not work very well in some cases, like cover crops, grassed waterways, filter strips, no-till, sometimes even drainage water management, they actually increase the amount of dissolved phosphorus that gets into the waterways. And you try to tell anybody in state government this, and they just, it's like they never even heard you. Vickie's been through that. I have at least a couple of times where you go to these EPA and the Department of Agriculture meetings and point this out and show them the studies that this is based on, and they just act like you never said anything. And here's the proof that these methods aren't working. This is dissolved phosphorus in the western basin of Lake Erie, and it starts in '74, and you can see it go down as phosphorus is taken out of the detergents, as the sewage treatment plants are made more efficient. And to about the mid '90s, when it starts going up again, and surprise, surprise, that's when factory farms started showing up in our watershed. Now this goes to 2011, so it's a decade out of date. And if you followed that line for another 10 years, you would see it drop a little bit in 2019, the year that it was so wet that a lot of the fertilizer and manure didn't get applied in the spring. So it was there was less phosphorus in the lake, but that was an outlier. So I don't know how you can look at that chart and say that what we're doing works, but really what it works for is to make people think that the politicians are doing something. This is a graph of Ohio fertilizer sales, and you can see that it's from 75 to 2015. There's a lot of variability, but basically the trend is going down. And I put this one in there just to show that some people from the Farm Bureau like to say that the problem is Toledo and other cities' sewage treatment plants, particularly Toledo, since it's by far the biggest city. The red lines indicate the amount of dissolved phosphorus in the what's going into the sewage treatment plant, and the blue lines indicate what's coming out of in the final effluent. And as you can see, 2018, there's less than a half of milligram per liter, and the city's permit allows 1 milligram per liter. So as of a couple of years ago, the city was under half of its permit. We recommend that we recognize that nature has rights. That's what the Lake Erie Bill of Rights was all about. And until we stop treating air and water like property, we're going to keep dumping our poisons in it because it doesn't have any rights. And that's a fairly new, for Westerners, that's a fairly new concept. For Native Americans, that was a concept that was around for thousands of years. But we think that that's going to be catching on, and we're going to be seeing more and more of that. We ought to have at least a moratorium on these facilities. We need remediation that works. For example, if we're going to put sewage treatment plants in each one of these facilities, that would certainly help, as opposed to the H2 Ohio, or the total maximum daily loads, TMDLs, that the Ohio EPA is now constructing. But basically, there's no fix for this industry. It needs to be banned. It's like lead in gasoline. You could reduce the amount that was in there, but lead is still something you don't want getting into the environment like it was doing in a big way from leaded gasoline. And it needed to be banned. And if we're going to have a healthy lake, we can't have these factory farms in our watershed, at least in this watershed, if nowhere else in the country. They do not belong. And we recognize and frequently say that this is a political fight. We got some pushback on this in the early years because people wanted to take the approach of inviting everybody into the room and set aside your priorities and just work on a solution. Well, when you find out that there are some people who are making a lot of money and have careers invested in the status quo, they're not about to set their priorities aside and work on a solution. This is a political fight. And until enough people get concerned about it and start raising enough hell, it's not going to get fixed. And just as an example, this first bullet point here, the person who was the former deputy chief of the Ohio EPA worked for 19 years as a lobbyist for the Farm Bureau before the state hired him. The H2 Ohio, or best management practices, as some people call them, is good money after bad. These operations get an incredible amount of public support, and we need to update that $17 million because it's a lot more than that now. And that money needs to be shifted to sustainable farming, particularly sustainable livestock farming in this case. And again, that's a political decision, whether or not we're going to do that or keep passing farm bills that give the money to the factory operations. And the big political decision is going to be who's going to clean up the lake. The farmers, the row crop farmers who've already reduced their commercial fertilizer usage and don't even use manure. The water and sewer ratepayers who have spent billions cleaning up sewage treatment plants, or the responsible parties, the factory farm corporations that are causing the problem. And that is a huge question. That's going to be a political decision to make it. So we know that we can do this because we did it before in the 1960s. And the power of democracy can save Lake Erie again if we inform enough people and enough of them get organized and take action. So what you can do, as I'm sure people in the league know from many years of being active citizens, spread the word. We take this program anywhere we can. Local governments should be getting involved and taking position. We got Toledo City Council, for example, to pass a non-binding resolution to ban factory farms. Now, it doesn't have the power of law, but it certainly helps to elevate the issue in the public debate. And here's some ways that we're active picketing. Over in the bottom left there, you can see the animals that escaped the factory farm for the Old West End Festival. My wife actually is the cow in shackles there. And so we try to get this message across as often and far and wide as we can. A great quote from Margaret Mead: "Never doubt a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And here is the veal operation that I showed you in the one slide about Bridgewater Dairy in the little white highlighted area. That's what those things look like. Those are male calves that get taken away from their mothers right off the bat. Like I said, if they don't get a bullet in the back of the head or shipped off to the shoe factory, that's where they go. Here's just a few examples of the industrial agriculture that about 99% of our meat and milk and eggs are produced this way. Here's us in action. Last summer, we had a big billboard campaigned all over Toledo and other places. We had an airplane tow this banner, Lake Erie does not equal a toilet, ban factory farms. That was up over downtown when the Solheim Golf tournament was going on, and so forth. So thank you very much for the invitation to be with you, and appreciate that very much. And I appreciate the good work and the activism that the League of Women Voters members have done for many, many years. So if you have questions, Vickie's got the answers. And if you just want to make a comment, don't worry about it. If you don't have a question, that's fine.
Hey, Mike, this is Karen, and I have a question.
Sure.
It's kind of clear to me that, in my opinion, actually, H2O Ohio is not going to work, even though we're putting millions of dollars into it. At what point do you think that the government and farmers will acknowledge that it's not working, or do you think we'll just keep putting millions into it and fighting that losing battle? What do you think?
I think that's going to continue, Karen. It's going to continue until enough people take the time and do a little reading on their own part and get active and raise hell, because right now it's being sold as the solution, and we know it's not. But you know, I mean, it doesn't work. It's pretty clear that it doesn't work when you take a few minutes and look at the facts of the case. But it's not something that is out in the public very much. And part of that is because we can't get the reporters to sit still long enough to actually go over the research summaries that we've put together. You know, I mean, we put all this information about all these different H2 Ohio methods that don't work. We've put them together in about 4 or 5 pages, not single space type either, 4 or 5 pages of very easy to read verbiage, where we've taken out of the abstract from these studies. We've quoted from the abstracts and listed the name of the study and where it was done and when it was done. And these come from places like Purdue University and the University of Kansas, even the USDA. So, you know, trying to get reporters to dig a little bit and not just take the next handout from the Department of Natural Resources and run that as a news story is not easy.
So what is the money being used for? Because it has money in it.
H2 Ohio?
Yes. I just saw water treatment plants, but that they were all small projects, but it's a lot of money. So where's the money going?
It's going to pay farmers for these methods and a few other things. I mean, there, for example, H2 Ohio addresses, in a very small way, addresses the problem with lead water lines going into people's houses, leaking sewage or leaking septic tanks, which is a minuscule part of the problem as far as Lake Erie is concerned. But most of it goes to these practices that don't work, and farmers are getting paid to do these things. And I'm sure most of them are thinking that they're contributing to the betterment of the lake, and it's nonsense.
Can I add something?
Yeah, please.
Part of the program, the H2 Ohio program, they wanted to get the manure further away from the facilities. So they're paying row crop farmers $60 an acre if they'll put manure on their fields. And so as I see it down here in Southern Wood County, it's the same farmers that were already putting the manure on. So I just submitted a public records request to Wood, Soil and Water. And surprisingly, she wrote back and said, we'll get that information for you. But today I saw that it was transferred down to the ODA, so we'll see. But there's a lot of money that people are getting to put manure on their fields. Which, if you think about it, do we do we pay anybody to take Walmart's waste? Do we, why are we paying to take care of waste from privately owned farms
that are making a profit?
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right.
And I didn't even mention this, but the bottom line is we don't need these things. I mean, people are used to the fact that we've got these factory farms now, and it's like they've been here forever or something. They've only been here since the mid-90s, and I don't recall having to wait in line at the grocery store for the next shipment of milk or eggs or pork chops. We were able to feed ourselves quite well, thank you, without these things. And there were a hell of a lot more family farmers, livestock farmers on the land then that have been driven off the land. And so it's public policy, unfortunately. It's public policy that has a lot of money behind it. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. It's not because we need to.
What is the role at this point for Farm Bureau and EPA? Because I know at one point going to an EPA hearing for a factory farm was a waste of time. And then we had to battle over Farm Bureau versus EPA. What is the state now that's going on?
Well, the battle of the Farm Bureau versus the EPA was much ado about nothing, because the EPA was only ever talking about voluntary programs. Like every one of these H2 Ohio programs is voluntary. And the Farm Bureau would raise a ruckus every time anybody like us mentioned that we ought to have mandatory programs, because they didn't want anybody telling them what they had to do. But now we're learning that even if these programs were mandatory, which they're not, it still wouldn't do the job. So, it's...
What is the EPA doing? Anything?
Well, the EPA isn't even got any authority over this. Vickie, that's your area.
Okay, well, this is the weird thing, Joyce, that Ohio has two CAFO permitting programs. One's done by the Ohio EPA and one's done by the Ohio Department of Ag. And unfortunately, back when they tried to transfer just the CAFO portion of this program to the Ohio Department of Ag, they put right in the bill that they had to get permission from the US EPA. And that's been 22 years ago, and they still don't have permission to do any CAFO permits. So that's a big problem. And to make it even worse, most of the money for the program went to the ODA. And so they actually put the manure management plans together. But because of the fact that we have found so many problems with their manure management plans, now the manure management plan for most of the CAFOs in the Western Lake Erie Basin just say, we're gonna either give or sell all of our manure. And so there is no plan. There's no soil tests. There's nothing specific for the fields. It just says any fields not under the control of the CAFO owner, you don't have to have any documentation. So, it's crazy to think that you would put manure that contains nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, and phosphate on fields if you don't even know if those fields need that manure. And a lot of the fields in the Western Basin are very high in phosphorus. So it's just a scheme that they've got. And just to show you what's happening here in Wood County, the big dairy that's 6 miles east of Portage just changed ownership again for the 4th or 5th time. And they're going to enlarge to 5,000 cows. They currently have 3,000. They're going to enlarge to 5,000 cows. And they're waiting to see if they can get money for a digester or something. And it's like, this is, if they weren't getting grants and subsidies, they couldn't keep these things going. they get so much money from USDA and these other programs that's the only way they can keep going. Because if you do a Google search and they have dumped millions of gallons of milk in the last 5 years, it's just appalling to think that this guy's going to add 2,000 more cows and we don't need the milk.
Just to get into what Vickie was talking about, the soil tests and the manure management plans, if you take a look at the screen here, it's a little hard to read, but where it says manure management, it's got an orange question mark there. The reason I put this in here, manure management is one of the things in the H2 Ohio program. And if you look at the recommendations that are in the total maximum daily loads, or the TMDLs, that the Ohio EPA is being forced to do, if you look at the recommendations, they'll have a significant amount of acreage will have recommended manure management programs. And if you take a look on the left, there's the soil test method. And there's 3 of them: standard, grid, and zone. And these are basically, the grid has a lot more test locations than the standard, and the zone method has a lot more than the grid. And so if you do standard, the standard soil tests, you'll come out with a recommendation of needing 200 pounds of phosphorus per acre. Whereas if you do the most expensive zone test, you come out with a recommendation needing 58 pounds. So, you know, you can have every acre in the watershed, you can have a manure management recommendation. And if you don't require the most thorough kind of testing, you're going to wind up putting 4 times as much, almost 4 times as much phosphorus on, and you're going to say, well, that's what the testing said. So, you know, that's, again, there's no fixing this industry. You know, before we industrialized livestock raising, and I can attest to this because I grew up in the country and used to clean out pig barns and cow barns. And you had a pitchfork, and you went in and you picked up relatively dry stuff and put it in the manure wagon, and they went out on the field and spread it around. And it was coming from a lot more locations than they've got now, because everything's been concentrated, and it's liquid now, and it goes down to these drain tiles. So it's just a recipe for disaster. And we can play around the edges with H2 Ohio and try to put in enough filter strips and everything, and we're just never going to get there. Plus the fact that it's brutal and dehumanizing for people who work in those facilities, and it's abomination for the animals.
I see that there's 3 questions in the chat button. Is that right, Joyce?
I've got one. Yeah, this is Amanda Gamby, BG Sustainability Director. Oh, that was about the speaker at the League annual meeting. Okay.
Oh. And that there's a native plant.
Okay, these are
I put 2 things in chat.
general service announcements. I had a question. I've been trying to native plants
mentioned.
Am I muted now?
No, go ahead, Steve.
Okay, I was yelling a question and I was getting mad at Joyce because she kept not asking her question, and I found out I was muted. So you're forgiven. Those are good questions anyway. I was gonna, I had one thing that's a little off the subject, but I was trolling around on the internet or whatever, and I came across the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement of 2012. And it's a load reduction agreement, and it was adopted in 2016. It includes all the states and provinces in Canada that border on the Great Lakes. They came up with a U.S. action plan for Lake Erie in 2018. It was going to do a phosphorus load reduction. And how they measure this, I don't know. But anyway, they're going to reduce it by 40%. That was the target. And they have a window of from 2018 up to 2023 to be 40% below the baseline, which was whatever it was in 2008. Have you guys ever heard of this, or
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So is anything happening with that? Is that going to be used for the TMDL? Does everybody know what a TMDL is? A total maximum daily load. And that's supposed to be a victory that was going to save everything, but you guys don't seem to think so.
Well, that agreement, Steve, is at the core of the EPA setting the total maximum daily loads. If you take a look at the draft TMDLs that they've done, and they've got 200 or 300 of them that have to be done for the Ohio portion of the Western Lake Erie Basin. And they've done maybe 50 or so, maybe a few more than that by now. If you take a look at them, you can see that they have the information in there about what the problem is, how much excess nutrients are getting into the stream that they're measuring, and what the recommendations are. And the recommendations in every single one of those don't include anything more than these H2 Ohio methods. Now, these things haven't worked to this point. They've been voluntary, but even if they make them mandatory, they just don't work. And that's what they're basing this on. And they're saying that in order to get to the goal of a 40% reduction, which is the goal that you just mentioned, this is what we have to do. And they're saying that somehow or another, it's going to start working from here on out when it hasn't worked up till now.
Do you know anything about the Chesapeake Bay?
Call from
The Chesapeake Bay is supposedly under a TMDL, and they've got a big effort to clean that all up. And I just wondered if you knew anything about whether that's been working or not, because they've got the Susquehanna River. If you're familiar with Pennsylvania and everything, drains most of that state practically, and goes into Chesapeake Bay.
That for the first couple of years that we were organized, in fact, this slideshow had a couple of slides in it about the Chesapeake Bay and the improvements that were made there since they instituted the TMDLs. And it has made progress. But when you take a look at the differences in the two watersheds, they've got almost no subsurface drainage in their watershed. I mean, they have some, because it's a huge watershed. Ours is about 80 square miles, and theirs is like 10 times that. So anyway, the makeup of the watersheds are very different. They have a lot of factory farms there, but they also have a lot of livestock operations where the livestock, what's recommended is keep your cattle out of the creek.
Oh, I like that.
Around here, there aren't any cattle in the creek. They're all in these factories. So, and I don't have a really solid answer for you, Steve, but I know that that given the conditions in our watershed, trying to do the same thing here is going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible.
You used the term sustainable farming at one point. How do you define that?
That's a pretty slippery term. I guess I use it as sort of shorthand for old-fashioned livestock farming methods. I mean, when I was a kid growing up and worked on farms and we dealt with manure the way I explained earlier, that was sustainable because you had animals that were creating waste and a lot of nutrients in the waste, and you put it on the land. And for the most part, it stayed out of the lake. That's not what we're doing now. Now, you know, some people would argue that the way row cropping is done is not sustainable because, you know, it depletes the soil, and there's all kinds of arguments about that. But just in regards to livestock, if we just went back to the practices we were doing before factory farms came in, that's a pretty sustainable way of farming.
So what can an individual do? Well,
get informed, understand that what we're being told works, doesn't work. It's just like any other issue that you all have worked on over the years, telling more people about it, getting people concerned, contacting your elected officials, getting out on the street and protesting, letters to the editor. I mean, there's no magic here. We've just got to get the word out to enough people and hope that they care, because if they don't, nothing's going to change. You know, our little group is not going to make Lake Erie get better. All we can do is tell people about this.
Mike, I have a question. I know you've put your blood, sweat, and tears into this for years, and so is Vickie. How do you stay hopeful, and what motivates you to keep going?
Prozac.
Okay.
What I think keeps me going, and whether it's this issue or you know, there's so many other things that people devote their time and energy to, is knowing, first of all, that something needs to be done, that you can't just keep ignoring this problem. You got to do something. So that's one thing. The other thing is, as crazy as the world is, and the fact that this country can elect somebody like Donald Trump and think that that's going to get us somewhere, you can feel like you're going a little bonkers. And it really helps to have a community, even if it's a small community, of people who care about things, and you know that they care because they put their time and effort into it. And if you can be around some of those people and kind of insulate yourself, I guess is one way of putting it, from some of the craziness, that's important. Because if you're just out there on your own in this culture of throw away and destroy, you'd go nuts. That's my prescription.
Vickie, do you have anything to add to that? Because you've been at it for, I don't know, almost as long as Mike.
A lot longer than Mike, Steve. Vickie, yeah. You're muted. You're muted.
Oh, Vickie.
Am I muted now?
No, now you're good.
Okay. I agree with Mike, but part of it is the fact that it's just so wrong, you know. And it's like, first of all, I live in the country out here, and we've got a small CAFO across the road, and he tries to do the right things. I mean, he's only got a couple hundred, maybe 300 cows, but it's still, you know, it's like, keep your farm on your farm. It's like, we've lived out here for 50 years. And it's like, now all of a sudden there's days in the summer, a lot of days in the summer, that we have to close up the house and turn on the AC. And we, I mean, just like with Mike, with the native plants, we're outside working in the yard all the time, and you can't go out when it's bad. And this is just a small one. I mean, the poor people that live over by Askins, which is west of Signet, and this one I was just telling you about that's going to 5,000 cows, they don't have a chance. I mean, if you breathe that stuff in, you're getting particulates in your lungs. And my neighbor's daughter actually had fungal pneumonia and almost died from it because they were putting manure on the field right next to her house. So it's like, you know, it's not just a NIMBY thing. It's just wrong. You know, it's wrong for the animals. It's wrong for the environment. It's just wrong. There's nothing good about it. The meat and the milk and the eggs, they're not good for you. You know, you really should have organic or free range or whatever. And it's like, you know, we're paying for this. You know, that's the thing. If, like I said before, if it wasn't for grants and subsidies, they couldn't keep these things going. So it's like, I don't want them anymore. And I just certainly don't want to pay for them. And I don't want to pay some guy down the road $60 an acre to put manure on his field. And it's just like, you know, I feel that the day is coming, hopefully, when vegetable-based meat and soy milk and all of these other things are going to start getting more and more popular, because as long as our legislators keep giving money to these people, they're, like I said, the guy's going to 5,000 cows and he wants to get a digester and he wants us to pay for it.
Is Ohio the biggest group of factory farms, or is this all over the country?
Yes, it's all over the country. Yeah.
Iowa and North Carolina are particularly bad, but it's virtually every state, if they've got agriculture, they've got these things now. And this didn't just happen. This happened because the federal government decided this was a good thing to do and started pouring money into it.
Get big or get out.
Get big or get out.
Yeah.
And our land grant colleges like Ohio State have, you know, years ago were doing some of the research necessary to make this happen. So that's why we're saying it's a political fight.
Well, and the sad thing is, you know, they get the grants and the subsidies, and then they give political donations to the legislators, and it's just, you know, kind of a little circle going on there, and sadly they're ruining our environment.
I think it's North Carolina has the hogs, doesn't it?
Yes.
That's their biggest problem is the hogs. Yeah.
They actually had a moratorium for a while because there was some big hurricane that came through. Oh, it's probably been 12 years ago, and a bunch of the hogs drowned, and it flooded right down the main street of some major city. And so they finally got a moratorium, but as soon as it expired, they went right back in business again.
Oh, do you have any good news?
Here, vote with your fork. You know, I think Mike brought this up. There's 3 times a day that you can vote to get rid of factory farms. And that's by buying free range or going to your farmers markets or whatever. Don't buy the crap from the factory farms.
And 95 to 98% of what's in the grocery stores is raised this way.
Yes.
So unless you really make an effort to find through a farmer's market or you know, an independent producer that you know is doing the right thing, that's what happens.
or become a vegetarian.
Yeah. Or you know, we our group has been very careful about making eating recommendations because we know people feel very personal about that. But you know, that's something that deserves some thought. You know, do you have to have meat every day to be healthy? Well, probably not. You know, and rearrange your cooking style just a little bit. You can make a difference. But again, this is political. This is not going to be solved. I don't think we're going to solve this problem by people eating less meat. I mean, that would have some impact, but the reason we've got the problem is because political policies and money have directed the industry in this way.
Okay, I'm feeling very depressed.
Joyce, vegetables are much better for you than meat anyway. So go enjoy some vegetables.
Yeah, I was going to have a hamburger tonight, but I have those power bowls. Have you ever tried those? That I don't know who makes them, but it's got cauliflower instead of rice, and it's you can get one with a meat substitute in it. I thought I'm going to go try that.
Good for you.
I've had it sitting in there thinking, do I really want to eat?
Well, you know, the majority of people in the world get their protein needs from other than meat.
Beans.
A combination of legumes or beans and grains. And that's why corn and beans is such a popular diet in some parts of the world, or rice and beans, or rice and lentils. And, I mean, it's the combination of those two things that provides a complete protein that we would normally get in meat, because our culture, that's the way we've been brought up.
I just got something from somebody that said 80% of the corn and beans that we grow in Ohio go to feed animals.
Yeah.
So it's not like that food, when they say, you know, that egg is the largest industry in Ohio, that's very misleading too, because that includes all the restaurants and grocery stores and everything else, because they're actually a very small portion, because they're pushing the small farmers out.
That's where most of Wood County's crops go, is to feed the animals.
Yep.
The wheat, the soybeans, the whole works.
Yep.
Yep.
And those are the big crops in Wood County.
So grow a garden too.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the evening? Thank you very much for bringing us up to date. It's one of the reasons I proposed to the board that we do some thoughts about the environment, was we haven't done anything as a league very much lately. And so I had assumed, and that's always dangerous, that things had gotten a little better, because I haven't heard as much of it recently. And you're saying things are not better, if not better, worse, because we are getting more farms.
When people ask me, how's the lake doing? I can confidently say worse than it was last year, because as Vickie knows, the Ohio Department of Agriculture, and same thing with Michigan and Indiana, they just keep allowing more and more of these operations. There's been over 50 new or expanded factory farms in the Ohio portion of this watershed just since Toledo's water crisis in 2014. So if you keep adding to it, it's not going to get any better.
Thank you. Thank you all. We've got a lot to think about. Is there a action network that you have that you let people know when it's time to make their voices heard?
Well, thank you very much. If this was an in-person meeting, we'd have a sign-up sheet. And we put people on the mailing list. We mail out usually only once, sometimes twice a month, so we don't inundate you. And try to keep people apprised of things that are going on, at least in the Toledo area, where they can participate. So we haven't developed a good way to do this electronically.
They could put their names and
you
emails
know,
in the chat.
Hang on just a minute. I can do that.
Subscribing to.
What I'll do, I will put on the screen in the chat. I will put the link to where you can subscribe to the newsletter.
Okay.
And if you want to save the chat, you can go down where you would write something and the 3 little dots on the side, click it and you can save the chat and you'd have this.
Oh, good.
So go to chat and click the 3 little dots, save chat. There it is. And that'll give us this website.
Yeah, if you go to that link, you can just, a little form pops up and you can just fill in the information and you'll be on our mailing list.
Okay. Okay. We have our assignment.
Thank you. I wouldn't have thought of doing that before.
Oh, yeah.
Zoom does it all.
We've done this before.
Okay, thank you very much for updating us, and we will hope to hear more in the future through your website, through your mailing, the link to your newsletter, and remind people that our sustainability director is speaking at our annual meeting, and this is the weekend for the natural plant sale. What do we call it? Char native plant sale.
Native plants.
Friday,
Saturday at the fairgrounds. I think it's the Champions building.
Okay. Okay.
Mm.
All right.
I can't remember the hours.
Thanks, Vickie. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation.
We'll keep in touch. Mm.
All right. We will advertise that we can see it if they've missed it by going back to, that it's been recorded. Thank you.
Night, all.
Good night.
Thank you.
Oops.
There you go.
All right. Okay.
Well done, Mike and Vickie.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. Take care.
Yep, you too.
Oops.
I'm going to end the meeting. That'll take care of you.